Mother relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Caroline Dubois' dance partner for the Jonas vs. Price undercard has been announced, and they've decided to go with a super featherweight. They've decided to go with Shin. Now, by itself, without any context and without any backstory, Dubois versus Shin is an action fight. They are both action fighters. So most of you will already be familiar with young Caroline's methodology. You'll be familiar with her, but if you're not familiar with Shin, what she is a come-forward mauler, a come-forward pressure fighter. So between Caroline's base style and Shin's base style, what you've got is an action fight, an all-action shootout. Shin, who was last in action in December of last year, won a unanimous decision. She's on a 3-fight winning streak, won 2 of her last 3 fights by way of knockout. So she is a dangerous fighter and a strong fighter at super featherweight, but what that essentially means is that instead of unifying titles with Beatriz Ferreira, who offered to stand in, who offered to box Caroline on this same show, Caroline and her team decided to fight a naturally smaller fighter. Caroline and her team decided to box a super featherweight. And this is after Caroline Dubois had the audacity, the nerve, to call Terry Harper a coward. Caroline stated for Terry, it's on a huge show, it's on Sky Sports, it's in London, it's on one of the biggest platforms, and 250,000 pounds is big money for a female boxer. When you're comparing it to the men, there's no competition, but unfortunately, we're not there yet. We're getting there, but it's not there yet. She's coming off a couple of losses. No, she isn't. She's coming off a win over then-champion Rhiannon Dixon. Does it make you feel better to misrepresent the situation? Caroline continued, she's coming off a couple of losses and a lousy performance. I don't see her being what she thinks. She's not going to dominate the division. She's not going to be undisputed. She's not good enough. Check out the badass over here. It might be her last big payday. It's unfortunate she's allowed this one to slip by. Ultimately, I wanted to be undisputed by the end of the year. If that's what you wanted, then why are you fighting a super featherweight instead of Beatriz? Beatriz Ferreira, who called out Dubois on X last week, writing, "Hi, Caroline. Did you forget that I'm the IBF World Champion at lightweight? The Beast is always ready if you want a unification fight. There will be no sweet Caroline that night. Give Eddie Hearn a call, and we can make the fight." Eddie Hearn recently revealed to IFL TV that he wanted Ferreira versus Dubois to feature on the Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn card on April 26. That show's an even bigger show than this one, than Jonas versus Price. Dubois is adamant that she will eventually get to Ferreira at some point, especially with her undisputed deadline set for the end of 2025. She said, on Ferreira, I know people feel like I'm ducking her. I'm not at all. When I look at the 135-pound division, she's one of the toughest. Along with Alicia Baumgartner if she moves up. I want that fight to be a big fight. I want it to marinate a little bit. That's a very good fight. But you didn't want the Rhiannon Dixon fight to marinate. You didn't want the Terry Harper fight to marinate. Why does this one have to marinate? In women's boxing, there's not that many women that are great. So when you have the opportunity to have a great female fight, it's good to get a build-up and the marinating that the men have. No, what it sounds like is you don't keep the energy for Beatriz Ferreira that you have for these other girls. You like to play Billy Badass with these other girls, but not with her, so you're not in a hurry to fight her. Even if it's on a huge show. I've said it loads of times. I want to be undisputed by the end of the year, so we're gonna get to her eventually. I don't believe that. I don't believe that Caroline Dubois would face Beatriz Ferreira on that kind of schedule because I'm convinced she's trying to age Beatriz out. Beatriz is already some years older than Caroline Dubois, so time is on Caroline's side. Though here and now, it's too dangerous, more dangerous than Caroline would like. And by year's end, that's still too soon. Too soon for Caroline, who's starting to show her character and what kind of person she really is underneath. You like to play Billy Badass with Rhiannon Dixon, and you like to play Billy Badass with Terry Harper because they're not Olympians like you are. Beatrice is, and that's why you want to fight with her to marinate. That's why, instead of fighting her, you're fighting a super featherweight. You don't want to unify as much as you let on. You don't want to be undisputed. No. She's no Katie Taylor. You know, Katie Taylor's career is winding down. And a big part of her meteoric rise was that she was willing to go after anybody and everybody.
Fights with fighters that she didn't even need. She didn't need to go to 140 pounds to fight Christina Linardatu, the same Linardatu that had already beat Alicia Baumgartner. Katie didn't need that fight, but she had it anyway.
She didn't need to give Delphine Persoon a rematch. She wanted to, and so she did. And when the Amanda Serrano rematch fell through, she didn't need to fight Chantel Cameron. She wasn't obligated to do that. She chose to do that. And it's very clear that Carolyn is not cut from that same cloth.
She ain't built like that. She's not built like Katie.
So often heralded as the heir apparent who can go on to become the face of women's boxing, not by being this strategic, because a big part of the boom was that it's easier to make the fights with the girls. It doesn't take as long as it does with the men.
Unless you're as strategic, as careful as Carolyn Dubois, who's not fooling anybody. She's not fooling me. You called Terry a coward.
Seems to me you were projecting, because whenever Beatrice Ferreira is mentioned, you clam up. You're a different person. Suddenly, you're not Billy Badass anymore, that wants all the smoke.
Bullshit.
That's what people are starting not to like about Carolyn. That's what I'm starting to not like about Carolyn, and this is counterproductive. For the sport of women's boxing,
what started to win people over was they seemed more willing to take on the challenges, the tough fights. Not Carolyn, she's only looking for the easy ones.
She ought to change her name from Carolyn to Anybody But Beatrice.
Put a hashtag on it.
Anybody But Beatrice.
In men's super lightweight news, Teofimo Lopez versus Richardson Hitchins is now close to being finalized, with dates being explored in May or June. The ring is learned. Lopez is the ring and WBO Super Lightweight World Champion. Hitchins is the IBF Super Lightweight World Champion.
Turkey El Sheikh is the one putting this together. This would bring a unification match to the 140-pound division that sorely needs one.
Needs some action.
But this isn't exactly an action fight. No, this fight pits the pure boxer against the boxer puncher. Richardson Hitchins for Teofimo presents the same challenges that Sandor Martin presented, that Jermaine Ortiz presented, with a bit more height and length than those fighters. What's different about this fight than those is that, well, this would be a unification match, there's that, but there's also that Teofimo's not the house fighter.
This is not a top-ranked show. If push comes to shove, there's no lifeline, and Top Rank can't bail you out.
Some would say that they bailed him out in the Sandor Martin fight where he was knocked down 2 times, and some would say he was bailed out of the Jermaine Ortiz fight. I remember immediately after that fight, there were a lot of people saying that they scored it for Jermaine.
The wild card.
Teofimo Lopez is now being trained by Eddie Reynoso. He's going to be in his corner, and we're going to get our first look at Eddie Reynoso's version of this fighter, though. How much can Teofimo change after just a few weeks and just one camp?
We'll see.
Now, one of Teofimo's supporters, a guy who goes by the name Flex BK Alfonso, said, Jules asks all these things of David Benavidez, Unify, Ring Magazine champ, etc., but dogs out Teofimo, who's accomplished these goals.
Yeah, then he shot himself in the foot with George Kambosos. I like how you left that part out.
Why? Why do people dog out Teofimo Lopez? Well, could have gave Vasilo Lomachenko a rematch, which would have made for a bigger fight. Bigger than the George Kambosos fight. You remember that he wanted big money for what wasn't a big fight with George, when you could have got big money with Loma
in a rematch. But you didn't want to do that.
And that's fine. It's his prerogative. If he didn't want to, he didn't want to. But it didn't help that he drug out the negotiations with George, that he backdoored Top Rank.
We all know he did.
With Triller, and when that doesn't work out, the fight ends up going to Matchroom, where he lost.
Why is it that Teofimo's fans never like to acknowledge that he lost the George Kambosos fight?
Or that he's been a thorn in Top Rank's side for years now, that it's not easy to promote this fighter, it's never easy to make a fight for him, that if people regularly dog him out,
that's why.
And never mind the bigoted and racist statements that he's made, I guess you're going to conveniently ignore that too, likely because you're a bigot and you're a racist.
You want to have this conversation, Flex? Let's have this conversation.
The only reason you look the other way when it comes to this stuff is because you likely behave the same way he does. You likely say the same stuff that he says. And you're getting mad at me for pointing it out.
I'm supposed to celebrate it.
So now baby bigot Teofimo is facing Richardson Hitchins in a potential banana skin, a fight that he could lose.
In pursuit of a bigger bag than Top Rank was willing to provide him. Top Rank is okay with all of this, by the way. We talked about that in a previous video, they're more than happy to let Teofimo go box on Turkey shows.
And he's more than happy to do it in pursuit of a bigger bag.
Which could blow up in his face because it's blown up in his face before. That's what happened with George.
They don't want me to point this stuff out, that stylistically, this is the kind of guy that has given Teofimo a lot of problems. He hasn't been at 140, who he used to be at 135.
Make matters worse.
There is an IBF final eliminator set to go down March 1st between former champion Subriel Matias and Gabriel Valenzuela. In Puerto Rico, the winner of the fight, whoever it is, becomes the mandatory challenger for the winner of Lopez versus Hitchins.
Neither Teofimo or Richardson Hitchins have ever been too keen, have ever been too crazy about a fight with Subriel Matias. If he wins in March,
Puts pressure on them. We all know how Johnny on the spot the IBF can be with their mandatories. Interesting tidbits in association with that news is that Matias has signed a co-promotional agreement with Dimitri Salita!
Crawford.
Surprised he didn't go back to Matchroom, but Dimitri Salita does have a broadcast deal with DAZN, so it's really all the same. He'll be boxing on DAZN. Something to keep in mind as this Lopez versus Hitchins fight gets over the line and gets finalized.
Does Teofimo win the fight?
Hard to say. Will he get the same consideration against Hitchins that he got with Jermaine Ortiz? With Jermaine, Teofimo was the house fighter on a top-ranked show. Here,
This is not a top-ranked show.
there is a legitimate argument that Richardson Hitchins may prove even more challenging than Sandor Martin or Jermaine Ortiz because he's taller and longer than those fighters, unbeaten.
Good enough to neutralize Liam Bottle.
Can he neutralize Teofimo, or will Teofimo have learned enough from Eddie Reynoso by then that he can win?
What he struggles with.
Pinning down a moving target, closing the distance and doing so effectively. That's what Teofimo struggles with. The movers, the jabbers, the boxers.
This is what he wanted.
This is a credible opponent, an unbeaten champion at super lightweight, so you can't trash the fight, you can't down it.
Even if he unifies, even if he wins, I don't think he stays at 140 pounds. If he does, he might have to fight Subriel, who he just walked away from.
We'll talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches. And finally, in men's light heavyweight news, the general air of panic that is being felt by some fans in some circles ahead of tonight's light heavyweight contest. A guy who goes by the name Here 129.
He didn't like my last video about David Benavidez.
He said, you can't deny that Canelo is afraid of Benavidez. Just name Bivol and Better Beef to try and deflect.
Deflect from what? Tonight's fight is a light heavyweight contest. The winner is the mandatory to Better Beef a Bivol.
It's also hilarious how Canelo fanboys say Benavidez is ducking both of those guys when he just moved up and is facing a dangerous Morel.
Morel ain't more dangerous than Artur Better Beef. He ain't more dangerous than Dimitri Bivol. Not more dangerous, not more proven.
He thinks it's a deflection, bringing up the winner of Better Beef versus Bivol, when that's what tonight's fight is supposed to be. That's what it's supposed to be about. To crown a mandatory challenger for the winner of that fight. He calls it a deflection that I'm talking about that, not talking more about Canelo, when ain't David Benavidez the one who said he's moved on from Canelo? He's not going down to 168?
I say it's a deflection that you keep talking about Canelo. If David Benavidez says that Canelo don't want to fight him, and that fight ain't gonna happen, then what the hell are we gonna keep talking about it for? He's in an entirely different division now.
I think you're the one deflecting. You want to keep talking about Canelo so you don't have to talk about Artur, so you don't have to talk about Dimitri. In the last 24 hours, the ring has learned that Turkey LL Sheik wants to match the winner of Better Beef versus Bivol rematch with the winner of tonight's fight between David Benavidez and David Morel. LL Sheik will invite Benavidez or Morel to be ringside for the rematch later on this month. That's why they're panicked. That's why they're nervous. That's why they want to keep the conversation on Canelo, who's still at 168, instead of focusing on the winner of that fight.
David's never wanted the winner of that fight.
This video clip here, this video clip is from months ago.
So to be honest with you, I can't do that because the way my contract is set up. Yeah. I can't mess with them people because, you know, obviously I can only work with my own promoter, but they said if you know they're willing to make that fight happen, obviously it's an enormous amount of money that they can.
The way his contract is set up, and yet Wilder's boxed on Turkey shows. So is Isaac Cruz and Rayo Valenzuela and Frankie Sanchez.
Carlos Adames is about to. Rolly is about to.
David is looking for a way out.
To be honest with you, I'm not worried about Turkey. We're on PBC. We're in the U.S. We're throwing fights here in Vegas. This is what I care about. I care about headlining fights for PBC.
They don't want me pointing this stuff out. They don't want me putting the evidence against David Benavidez together preemptively should he not fight the winner of that fight.
And he's not going to.
Now, what they've been relying on is the potentiality of a Better Beef versus Bivol trilogy as an adequate excuse for David not to stick around, for David to move on. Jerry Soriano!
That's what he was doing just the other day, not but 2 days ago here on this channel.
So do you think he was at all happy to hear that Turkey's got his eyes on tonight's fight, and whoever wins is invited to Saudi to be ringside for Better Beef versus Bivol 2, because we know what he wants to do. Do you think Jerry and the other Benavidez fans were at all happy to hear that? Do you think David was?
They don't have that narrative to lean on anymore. That crutch, that there might be a trilogy so David can't stay.
In case that went over your head in the last 24 hours.
You don't have that excuse.
So what did I tell you? I told you that David Benavidez can't bank on any delays from the guys on the other side of the aisle. So what he might do immediately after tonight's fight, should he win, look for talk of an injury immediately after. Injured hand,
A splinter, a hangnail, stubbed his toe on a Lego.
outside of whatever injuries he actually incurs in the fight, look for talk of an injury that takes him out of the running.
Just like Sebastian Fundora did after the Tim Tszyu fight.
Because he ain't fighting the winner of that fight. And you guys don't like me getting ahead of this because I'm smarter than you are and smarter than David.
You don't fool me.
Why should you be so bothered? Be so upset that I don't think he's gonna fight the winner of that fight. If anything, you should be urging him to prove me wrong.
Why are you mad?
Because I can see the bullshit coming a mile away, so you can't fool me?
Why are you mad?
Because I've got the video, I've got the audio, the screenshots, the screen recordings, the articles, all chronicling David's sudden interest in moving up to cruiserweight instead of sticking around to fight for undisputed?
Why are you mad?
Because you're afraid that I'll be right. That's why you're mad. That's what it is.
Yeah, I'd be nervous too, if I were you.